Friends, we are continuing our series talking about taking time to be engaged in some of the key habits of what it means to be followers of Jesus Christ. And today, we're talking about being humble. Be humble. And we have read this text from Luke's gospel, but before we kind of get into that, I want to ask you a question. How many of you have ever heard of Essena O'Neal? How many of you have ever heard of Essena O'Neal? Really? Not a single one of you? Well, let me tell you a little bit about her, just to kind of whet your appetite. Essena O'Neal was 18 years old, a teenager from Australia. And she was at the height of social media. She had 200,000 Facebook followers. She had 500,000 Instagram followers. And in the eyes of the world, I mean, here was a teenager who was incredibly successful. She had a following of all kinds of folk. And then one day, she decided to give it up. Just give it up. And so she posted one last post on Instagram. And she is no longer on social media. Now, I'm going to go back to that story in a second, but I just wanted to kind of whet your appetite with that story. Because it's actually a story that helps us understand a bit our gospel lesson today. So in our gospel lesson today, in the Common English version of this, Common English Bible version of this, let me share with you how Luke introduces this. Luke says it this way. He said, Jesus told this parable to certain people who had convinced themselves that they were righteous and who looked on everyone else with disgust. Now, so then Jesus tells the story, and the story starts out by saying, 2 men went to the temple to pray. And then Jesus tells us some things about those 2 men, and then at the very end of the story, he says, one of them went home justified. One of them went home justified. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, and one of them went home justified. Now, between those 2 statements is a pretty straightforward story, right? I mean, in the story, we have 2 men who went to the temple to pray, one who was a Pharisee and one who was who thought of himself and he was confident in himself that he was doing all the right things. He was devoted to his faith. He was devoted to the synagogue. He was doing all the right things. He was a good man. He was a Pharisee. And he prayed the prayer that we read there. The prayer that says, "Oh God, I thank you that I am not like those other people. Thieves, evildoers, adulterers, or even this tax collector." His prayer is haughty. It is arrogant. He thought highly of himself because he had done all these good things. He's not like those people, is he? And he stands in the center of the temple. Now you need to know that in that day, in that time, people stood to pray. So he stands right in the center of the temple to pray. And then we have the tax collector. Now, where does the tax collector pray? The tax collector goes to the far corner on the very back pew to pray. And he stands there and he prays. And his prayer is totally different, isn't it? What does he say? God, be merciful to me, a sinner. He will not even look up toward the heavens to God. He bows his head and prays there in the corner, in the shadows of the synagogue. And then Jesus said, this one went home justified. So, what's the moral of the story? Well, isn't it pretty simple? Isn't the moral of the story really simple? That don't be proud and arrogant like the Pharisee and be humble like the tax collector? Isn't that what Jesus is saying? Don't be proud and arrogant like the Pharisee, but be humble like the tax collector. Well, friends, what I would propose to you is that that's okay, except one thing. And that is, you need to know that the Pharisee was correct. The Pharisee was correct. He was right. He was not like all those other folks. He was a good Jew. He fasted twice a week. He gave a tithe. He gave a tenth of his income. He did everything right. He was not like those evildoers and those tax collectors and those rogues and those thieves and those adulterers. He was not like those people. He was right. He was better at keeping the law. He knew what the rules were. He was really good at keeping the law. He was more righteous than that tax collector over in the corner. He was. He was right. He was better than those folks. Righteous is not a word that we use very much in today's language. We use it, we hear it in the Bible, but we don't use it in our everyday speech. But what if you use the word successful instead? So for instance, think about an investment banker. If an investment banker is good at what he or she does, then an investment banker would be successful according to the standards of Wall Street. Or what about a person who is popular in school? Well, that person might be socially righteous or socially successful. Or what about someone who is faster than anybody else, whether it be in track or in swimming or whatever? Then that person is successful in athletics. They're successful. They do everything right. They're really good. In Major League Baseball, the ones who play in the World Series, they're good, right? They mastered their craft. They know how to put more runs on the board than the other team. They're good. They're successful at baseball. The Pharisee is successful. The Pharisee keeps the law. He does the right thing. He knows what the rules are, and he makes sure that he follows every single rule. And that's the reason that he thinks that he is more righteous than anybody else. But the scriptures tell us that he's not justified. The one who was justified was the tax collector. The tax collector who is exactly the opposite of the Pharisee. The tax collector who is the one that collected taxes for the Roman authorities so that the Roman army could occupy the Jewish homeland. The tax collector is the one who oftentimes would cheat people in order to get more taxes because he could fill his pockets with more money. That one is the one that went home justified. Now, why is that? Why is that? Well, friends, our righteousness is what we accomplish. Our righteousness is what we do. Our righteousness is about fulfilling all the law, the rules of the law, and doing everything right. Our righteousness is about all of that. It's about doing what is required. But our justification, Our justification is being counted right no matter what. Our justification is being counted right not because we have done something to earn it, but because God says that we have been justified. That God says that we are okay. Let me give you an example. Many of you in the room are parents. And all of us have had experiences with children, those of us who are parents, where our children disappoint us, where our children do things that upset us, where our children are not very lovable sometimes, where sometimes we just shake our heads and wonder, what in the heck is going on with this child of mine? And we still love them, don't we? I think of my daughter Amanda. My daughter Amanda has made some bad decisions over the course of her life. And I've been upset at her various times in her life. But friends, I still love her as I did the very first time she was placed in my arms at the adoption agency. I love her. And even though there have been times when she has disappointed me, I love her to the depths of my being. And friends, if me, an imperfect father, can love my daughter Amanda through all of that, how much more will God love us? How much more will God love us? The Pharisee is righteous. He is blameless. He does everything right. He does everything right. And the tax collector, he does not lead a blameless life. And what does he do? He stands off in the corner in humbleness and asks God for mercy. Because the only way that he can be justified is through a compassionate, merciful, and loving God. That is the only way that he can be justified. So it's a tricky parable. We do not live righteous lives. There's not a single one of us in this room that does everything right. Not a single one of us. Not a single one of us in this room that does everything right. But God does call us to be humble like the tax collector. And being humble is important. But more than that, it invites us to recognize who we are and whose we are. And it is only by the power and love and mercy of God that we are in relationship with God. We may be righteous, but we are not justified except by the power and grace of God. And friends, that's what the tax collector knew as he stood off in the corner and he said, "Oh Lord, have mercy on me, have mercy on me." And the only way that he was justified is by an humble heart that recognized who he was. But here's the other thing, righteousness is never enough. Even if we could do everything right, even if we could accomplish everything that we had on our list to accomplish, righteousness is never enough. Because when we base our goodness on our abilities and our accomplishments, it is never enough. Because there's always something more that we can do. There's always someone who's a little better than we are at that particular thing that we have based our life upon. Righteousness is never enough. So let me go back to Essena. Essena, the 18-year-old Australian teenager who had 200,000 Facebook followers and 500,000 Instagram followers. She made one last post on Instagram. And this is what she wrote. She said, "Without realizing it, I have spent the majority of my teenage life being addicted to social media, social approval, social status, and my physical appearance. She said social media, especially how I use it, is not real. It is based on contrived images and a persona that is really not me. Success is always in the number of followers. And here's the struggle. I always have to have more. I always have to have more. With that, she shut down her Instagram account. She shut down her Facebook account and began to live life differently. How many of you have checked in on Facebook today? And maybe while you did it, you checked, well, how many friends do I have? Do I have more friends than so-and-so? Does so-and-so have more friends than I do? Some of you have done that, I bet. We do a really good job sometimes of comparing ourselves to others. But the more we do, the more we discover that we cannot do, because we discover that there's always someone who may be a little better than us. Or if maybe we are the richest person in the world. Maybe we are Jeff Bezos. But there's some things about Jeff Bezos that he is not as good at as you are in this room. You can't do it all. You just can't do it. So how do we know if we're rich enough? How do we know if we're popular enough? How do we know if we're pretty enough? How do we know if we're successful enough? How do we know if we are good enough? How do we know if we're righteous enough? Well, we don't. And we can never get there. It is never possible to get there. So what is the secret about being a follower of Jesus Christ? I think one of the secrets is that we humble ourselves and we recognize that it is only by the love and mercy and grace of God that we can be in relationship with God. It is only through God's goodness that we can have a justified and right relationship with God. We can never do enough to earn that kind of relationship. We cannot compare ourselves to someone else and say, oh Lord, because I'm better than this person, I am good enough. We can never do that. Because there'll always be someone that does better than us in something along the life's way. So our task as followers of Jesus Christ is simply to humble ourselves and to accept God's love, to accept God's grace, to accept God's mercy, to recognize that it is only by the grace and mercy of God that we can be in right relationship with God. It is not anything we can earn. It's not anything we can do. And every single one of us, because we are human beings, even if we try to do all of that to earn that right relationship, we will mess up somewhere along the way. And so it's only through God's grace, God's love, God's acceptance that we can be in that right relationship. And so one of the acts that we need to accustom ourselves with is to humble ourselves before God and say to God, Lord, have mercy on me. Have mercy on me. And recognize that it's by the grace of God that we are in relationship with one another and with God.